Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is my pleasure to be the one to introduce to you our speaker for this afternoon's webinar. First and foremost, my name is Jericho Baliza. I happen to be the speaker's co-host on our very own YouTube channel, which is entitled Facial Value, which tackles various topics about well-aging. Anyway, today's webinar is made possible through the efforts of DMD Center and our channel, Facial Value. But before proceeding to introduce today's speaker, let me remind everyone to log in again on the second half of today's webinar. Login time is between 3:30 to 4 p.m. Webinar will start exactly at 4 p.m. Okay? So today's webinar is entitled Expose. Our speaker for today's webinar is a practicing dentist, consultant, and a speaker for almost 30 years. She has also been speaking for various dental manufacturers, brands, and distributors. She has an innate passion to share and teach. Thus, today's topic about infection control has been one of her recurring lecture for many years. So without further ado, please do welcome our very own Dr. Jean Villanueva.
Hello, doctors, dentists, dental hygienists, and all of in the dental profession here in the Philippines and abroad. Thank you very much, Jack, for introducing me. And as you can see, this is kind of new to me because I normally love to do lectures in front of my colleagues rather than through a camera. It feels different because I normally love to have an interaction with the audience and see if they are already sleepy or I need to make my lecture faster. So anyway, I will try to do the best I can not to put you all into sleep. And this webinar will have two parts. The part one, we will be discussing all the reasons why we get a disease, including COVID-19, because as you know, this is not the only virus that causes disease and can be transmitted human to human, and wherein we can be vulnerable. And then the part two is I will guide and try my very best to guide you what are the materials, equipments, and for disinfectant, sterilization, and everything you need to prepare in order to protect yourself, your staff, and your patients once you go back to your dental practice. Now, as much as I can, I will try to speak in English because we do have members from DMD Center that are not from the Philippines. So anyway, let's go ahead and proceed with the webinar. Okay, so welcome to Exposed. This is actually the title of my lecture for quite some time. That is the version 1. And this is the version 2, like SARS-CoV, there is COVID-19, which is the version 2. And I entitled it Exposed because it's supposed to expose our dirty little secrets on how we practice basic infection control. But now I think we need to expose more the truth and the lies about this virus, as well as the truth and the lies that has been going on about infection control, about treatments, and all those things that we get confused sometimes of what are we going to do now that this virus is wreaking havoc on what to do in our practice when we go back. So before I will proceed with the main topic, allow me to introduce myself first so that for those people who don't really know me that much and will ask the question who the hell she is, that she has the right to discuss this topic. Well, basically, I'm a dentist for 30 years already. So I guess that speaks for itself. And I'm a graduate of CEU College of Dentistry. And normally or generally, I lecture most of the time about aesthetic dentistry. I have a subspecialty on advanced restorative dentistry that I took up at UIC in Chicago, US. And then, well, this is the main reason why I sort have or mainly have a knowledge about infection control, because uh, who should be the best people to teach you how to do infection control but of course the dental manufacturers, because the dental manufacturers have been studying their products to check if it is effective, what are the best materials to use it in order to provide good infection control for all medical and dental facilities. So I first started training uh, at Alpha Dent Corporation under the brand of Sultan. I know most of you are familiar with Sultan before. It is a very well-known brand that manufactures infection control. And at the time when I had the training with them, this is the first time I developed my OCD when it comes to cleaning, because they made me appreciate the numerous pathogenic bacteria and virus that every day surrounds us. In actuality, COVID-19 is just part of a bigger microorganism or pathogens that can actually kill us, except that, COVID-19 has certain characteristics that resulted to this situation. So, uh, after Sultan, I have been involved with several manufacturers, and so I ended up lecturing and being a speaker of infection control for 18 years. Not because they are paying me, but because it became my passion. I realized a lot of dentists don't really follow the basic infection control protocol. Not because, they don't care or they couldn't care less. Well, some of them probably, but majority, in reality, as we will expose, because it is not cheap. It is very expensive or expensive to really practice the infection control protocol. Okay, so another thing is well, as this is the event of DMD Center, I would just like to give a little background of DMD Center that I created in 2016 and personally built the website. I didn't have a developer at that time. And so I created posts and a lot of educational material because at the time I thought I'm gonna retire. And then I got sideways when I was invited to become the consultant of Edelweiss Dentistry. So at the time, I thought I would just have like 20 or 50 dentists are gonna be a member of DMD Center. And it totally surprised me when it boomed up to 700 dentists. And I got so scared because I have to produce posts almost every week to share to all these members who trusted me enough to register. And when around 20 late 2017, because I got so busy, so I wasn't able to really update a lot of the posts I placed there until 2019, when I met a couple of dentists and other friends who are willing to help me out in order to revive this. And this is actually our very first webinar for DMD Center. So also 3 years ago, as you can see on how long I've been practicing dentist, so you probably can guess already how old I am. So I'm going through a journey on how to take care of myself to still look decent as I age. And this is why I ended up developing the YouTube channel Facial Value, that hopefully some of you who have the same issues like mine, who wants to age well, uh, will be able to visit and watch our videos there. And if you really like what you've seen, please do subscribe. Okay, let's go with the battle, because I consider this a war, and our enemy is the nasty COVID 19. Although, in reality, COVID 19 is just currently the superstar, but there are a lot of enemies we do have, which are pathogenic bacteria and viruses. But COVID 19 seems to stop us in our tracks on how we can go back to practice, especially since we are one of the most vulnerable profession in contracting this virus. Actually, the first ones are the dental hygienist, and then the respiratory therapy technician, dental assistant, and then finally us. So, in general, 3 out of 1, it's about the practice of dentistry. And this fight is not only protecting ourselves in terms of our health, but also protecting our means of living. Now, in fighting a war, I believe that in order to win the battle, we have to know our limitations, or the things that will end us losing this battle. The first one, I believe, is that we are trying to fight against time, in trying to know our invisible enemy. Although coronavirus has been in existence since 1965, and the mother of coronavirus is B814, COVID 19 has just been discovered to have a human to human transmission, which is originally zoonotic, in December 2019. And because of its effect globally, especially when it comes to economics, everybody now is trying to find means and ways in order to defeat COVID 19. Unfortunately, because it is affecting so many things in our lives, organizations, and people we used to rely on are now ending up to contradict themselves of what they declared before to be true and right, and now trying to compromise in order to, calm us all down who are already in panic of what's next. So I will give you an example about how it is very hard now to fully trust what used to be organizations and people beyond question on my next slide. But let me touch another enemy, because we are fighting against time and we're trying to uh, calm down a lot of panic people. There is what we call thesis pandemic. The thesis pandemic is that these are people who write articles, create videos about certain thesis that they feel it's true, but actually it's not proven yet. And then it gets promoted and shared in social media until so much of it has been talked about, and the ending is it becomes true. And again, the sample of that I will mention on my next slides. Another one is the conspiracy theories. These are a lot of, sometimes I don't know if people just don't have anything better to do while in quarantine. Like, for example, of a conspiracy theory is that Bill Gates has something to do with the spread of this virus because they wanted to eliminate people that cannot improve our species and make it perfect to the next generation. Or like for example, a pandemic thesis that came out from China wherein type O blood type has less chances to get COVID-19 than type A. Now again, this is not conclusive. So the one thing that is another challenge that we might lose this battle is the issue of availability of testing, vaccine, and treatment. So let's go first when it comes to testing. The most common test being used to check whether you are positive or negative of COVID-19 is what they call the RT-PCR test, or the reverse transcription polymerase chain reaction. Such big words. Okay, so what this test does is that through um, swabbing, either via oropharyngeal or OP, or nasal mid-turbinate or NMT, or nasal swab, you get the specimen and they test it. And since COVID-19 is RNA, they transform it to DNA. Now, in normal situation, this test should have a result 3 hours later. And in some countries, when they can afford a lot of these test kits, it can come out between 6 to 8 hours. But because of the volume of people that needs the test, it sometimes take 24 to 48 hours before the result comes out. Now, this test has a 60 to 70% of accuracy. And this is related in terms of relapse or reactivation. Let's clarify the epidemiological meaning of the two words. Because when a patient has COVID-19 and then the symptoms went away and then resulted to a negative test, after the patient is discharged or considered to be free of COVID-19, 5 to 10 days later, they will test positive. Now, it is not because the patient is reinfected by COVID-19, but because the RT-PCR test wasn't able to identify the presence of COVID-19 virus. Because in order for this test to identify you are either positive or negative, there should be a volume of 3,000 COVID-19 virus in your body. So if you have less than that, the PCR test will end up giving a result of negative. And that is why once the patient thought he or she is cured of COVID-19 and there's still COVID-19 virus inside your body, the tendency of this virus will again replicate itself until it produces a volume wherein the PCR test finally recognizes that you are positive. When it comes to reinfection, wherein reinfection means you are really totally cured of COVID-19 and then you got exposed again, or somebody transfer that virus to you, or by transmission, human to human transmission, And then, are you going to be reinfected? Now, this state is not yet proven. So hopefully, they pray that like any other viral diseases, wherein when the body produces the antibodies needed to neutralize a specific virus, then supposedly we shouldn't get reinfected. But there's no enough evidence yet if reinfection is possible. Now, the next test that is actually not uh, proven yet to fully work in COVID 19 or identifying whether you are positive or negative is the serology test. Now, supposedly, they are pushing this test, as I've said, like before, as we are fighting time. Everybody is trying to compromise. Now, supposedly, a serology test, instead of measuring the genetic material from the actual virus, they measure your body's response to being infected by the virus. The key step in the human immune system response to infection is the production of antibodies to the infection. This test uh, detects an active infection through the antibody that is produced by the immunity system. Now, what is nice about serology tests? So supposedly this serology test is advantageous for mass testing because it can be cheaper and the result will come out faster. Unfortunately, this test also has its limitation because neutralizing antibodies for the virus to come out in the body of an infected COVID-19 patient normally develops 1 to 2 weeks or even more. So, depending on when the patient has been tested, uh, the test may come out negative because the antibodies that is formed in the body of the infected patient may not be present yet. So the reliability of the serology test is also in question. Now, we are also trying to deal with rapid test kits. And there are rapid test kits that are approved by the FDA on March 30. There are around 17 PCR based test kits. This is like one of them, the Gene Expert box and the Genesig real-time PCR coronavirus. Now, this one is supposedly used to achieve qualitative detection of COVID-19 viral RNA extracted from the nasopharyngeal or oropharyngeal or sputum from patients. Now, up to this point, until we are able to do real mass testing, all these statistics that we see, like how many infected people, how many are discharged, and versus to the number of the population of the country, will never be accurate. So mass testing is very critical because through mass testing, we are able to separate the infected people from those who doesn't have COVID-19. And this will allow us to at least be able to do normal activities without always being afraid that we will contract this virus. And this test kits is specifically very important for dentists. Like for example, when you are going to do diagnosis, some of the suggestions of other lecturers that you should require your patients to have this test prior to the treatment. But unfortunately, since these tests are either expensive, not available, or not really totally reliable, then depending on the result of the test kits will also not help us much in determining whether it is safe for us to treat a certain patient. That is the problem now, because as I've said, the reason why we are going, there's a probability that we will get defeated by this virus is because there is no 100% accuracy in terms of result or something that we can depend on to make sure that we are safe while we are treating our patient. Now, vaccine is really the most critical weapon that we need in order for us or for everybody for that matter to go back to its normal life prior to COVID-19. Because if there is a vaccine, then we couldn't care less if COVID-19 exists. Unfortunately, in reality, vaccine takes 10 years to 15 years to develop and at least around 800 million USD of investment. Now, although there are a lot of companies now or even government who are willing to invest in the development of COVID-19 vaccine. Now, the reality that it will come as fast as we wanted to, like for example, what Dr. Anthony Fauci said in one of the news in regards to the development of vaccine. Dr. Fauci is the head of the National Infectious Disease Control in the United States. He said that if we are lucky, vaccine may get developed in 18 months. But this is really, I think, a pipe dream because SARS-CoV-1, when it came and became in existence prior to COVID-19, a lot of experts also tried to develop its vaccine, but it never came into a reality because after the SARS-CoV-1 kind of fade out into the picture, the investors stopped also investing to the experts who are trying to develop vaccine. Why? Because there's no more demand. So, because of the length of developing vaccines, it is very difficult to depend on this. And this is such an unfortunate thing. So, like for example, this Prodex B and this Fabunan antiviral injection. Now, of course, as a Filipino, I'm excited that there is someone out there who is also a Filipino who is trying to develop vaccine. But at the end of the day, no matter how proud that I am that there are people from the Philippines who are also smart enough to develop these things, this vaccine has not been proven yet. So let's hold our horses and pray that it will really happen. But don't hold your breath because it really takes time to develop vaccine. Now, not all news are bad news. This is a much feasible, faster solution that we can fight for COVID-19. An arsenal that is already existing in the market. And this method is called drug repurposing. So what exactly is drug repurposing? Now, drug repurposing is using drugs that are already commercially available for treatments of other diseases, and they try to check if this can be used in treating COVID-19 patients. Now, a very popular drug that came out in the market for drug repurposing is the Viagra. The Viagra is supposedly to treat hypertension and angina pectoris or chest pain due to heart disease. But instead of treating that, it treated something else, which is the hardening of another organ. So hopefully, we will find a drug that we can repurpose to treat COVID-19. So why do we need to know these things? Because at the end of the day, as doctors, we also influence our patients, and we have to be able to provide them the correct information. Because although drug repurposing is a hopeful treatment that can come out very soon, we should also be realistic and careful in providing information on this, because the disadvantage of releasing names of drugs that are not yet proven that can be repurposed to treat COVID-19, it may result to more harm than good, because the drug can get easily not available in the market because of panic buying. And another thing, it can result to a worse side effect to people who might try using this drug when there is no scientific evidence yet that it can indeed treat COVID-19. Let's just say, for example, this chloroquine and hydroxychloroquine. This is a drug for malaria. And it was announced for first time by no other than the President of the United States, Donald Trump. And then people go gaga and ended up buying this drug, which is actually a prescription drug. And there's this couple in the United States who took this chloroquine phosphate powder that is also used actually in cleaning the fish tank from grime and parasites. Now, what happened? One of them died. So, again, let's be very, very careful when it comes to releasing information about drugs that can supposedly treat patients with COVID-19. Another is the ivermectin, which was also tried in France. This time, this is for parasitic infection, and it was given to a patient along with azithromycin antibiotic. Now again, this is not 100% proven to work. This one is for vitamins that's been existing. Now, the vitamin D3, zinc, fish oil, vitamin C, probiotics, of course, these are all good vitamins to take to really boost our immunity system. But it is not a treatment for COVID-19. It can help you become stronger, or at least much healthier to take these vitamins. But this will not protect you or treat you if you have COVID-19. Because the only thing that can treat us from COVID-19 is our own neutralizing antibodies that gets to be developed inside our body once we have COVID-19. I'm not saying don't take these vitamins, but what I'm saying, this is not a form of treatment. Another is flu vaccine. The flu vaccine is being taken or injected to a lot of people during season of flu. But again, flu vaccine has a different virus. And it will not help you to have a flu vaccine to counterattack COVID-19 because it is intended for a different virus with a different genome. Now, another is Kaletra. This is again for AIDS. Now, hopefully, again, in due time, it may probably help. But as of the moment, there is no proven study yet that it can really treat COVID-19 patients. Now, the most recent is the remdesivir, which is created for Ebola virus. Now, there is recently news that remdesivir has a effect wherein it reduces the number of days of the patient being sick with COVID-19. There is a case wherein, because generally, a patient with COVID-19 recover after 15 days, generally. And with the use of remdesivir, the patient ended up recovering in 11 days. Now, of course, that is a hopeful thing to consider because at least if this will really help the person with COVID-19 to recover faster, then the patient doesn't have to go through the rest of the worst stage of COVID-19, like for example, the necessity of having a ventilator. Now, another treatment that is promising to be developed faster than having the development of a vaccine is what we call the convalescent plasma. So what exactly is convalescent plasma? Now, as you know, if you have the virus, your body, the army of your body, which are the antibodies, gets developed in order to fight this virus. Now, supposedly, the donated blood from COVID-19 recovered patients, they extract its plasma and apply this or inject this to those who are still sick of COVID-19. So supposedly the antibodies that are found in this plasma will be an additional army to the antibodies found on the COVID-19 patient. So this drug repurposing and convalescent plasma are more realistic in terms of time to be developed faster than the vaccine. So there are other three reasons why we might end up losing this battle. This is true not only to ourselves but to organization and people we consider as leaders to lead us. For example, in the recent news, the United States is thinking of stopping in supporting or giving financial support to WHO because according to Taiwan, so Taiwan is not part of WHO. So they don't have an identity. They informed WHO earlier than what WHO is claiming about the report that this COVID-19 is a human-to-human transmission. And even to ourselves. So sometimes we do things with a hidden agenda. So this becomes difficult to figure out what is true and what is not. Another thing is especially now because of the quarantine or the feeling of isolation or being alone, there's a psychological effect on us because we worry about what we're gonna do once we go back to practice, or are we gonna go back to practice knowing the danger that we are facing, the possibility that we can contract this virus. But so this psychological effect comes into play in the consideration of other unscrupulous business people.
who ends up selling more than they should on the PPEs or other equipments because there's high demand and there's a play of fear. So they get to earn playing with the psychology of their market. Now, I'm not saying everybody's like that because, in fairness to the business people or companies or distributors, sometimes they also do not have a choice. Why? Because shipping goes up, labor cost goes up, so they have no choice but to also increase the price. So then that comes into play greed and selfishness. Now, because we always have the tendency to look after ourselves first in times of, danger or trouble, we tend to hoard. So as we hoard, there's a lack of supply. And then when there's a lack of supply, what happens? The price increases. So we suffer ourselves with our own selfishness. So do not hoard, especially critical commodities, because this will eventually bite us in the ass.
So, what is really our enemy besides COVID-19 right now is our human nature. The problem is this is common to all of us. So it's like the fable of the frog and the Scorpio, wherein the Scorpio asks for the help of the frog to cross a lake or a stream, and then the frog said, how am I going to be sure that you're not gonna beat or kill me while we are in the stream, or if I will help you? And the scorpion said, of course I will not kill you, because if I kill you or beat you, I will end up drowning as well. But as we all know, the Scorpio end up killing the frog. And when the frog asked while drowning, why did you do that? And then the Scorpio said, well, because it's in my nature. So it's human nature what is happening right now during COVID-19 era as we speak. So how can we, stop doing all these things and end up making things worse than it is? Well, let's follow simple rules. Like, for example, one, stop panic buying. Panic buying results to increase of price and making materials or equipments that are necessary to help out, sick people, or being able to treat them well, and for protecting, frontliners. And like, for example, in our practice, if we all panic buy, at the end of the day, we also hurt ourselves because the price ends up to be really expensive. Now, we have to also think positive, but thinking positive doesn't mean we fool ourselves. But thinking positive, but at the same time being alert and realistic to what is really true and what we know prior to COVID-19. We also have to be logical. Okay, so we all studied science, physiology, anatomy, all these things we studied in school and took test on. So we have to put logic to what we know. So stop believing everything you read or hear. Then I know every one of us already want to go back to practice because we have family to feed. We have to survive. But let's stop impulsive buying. There are so many, hundreds of advertisings about the things that we should be buying so that we can go back to practice and protect ourselves, our staff, our patients. But if we keep on buying all these things, we will end up poor. So before you buy, you put logic into it and be realistic about it. So how do you all do this? Okay? So we do this through going back to the basic and the factual principles of what we know about infection control prior to this COVID-19 thing.
Anyway, let's know our enemy. Why we need to practice infection control. Because, doctors, friends, the reason why we practice infection control, first and foremost, is not because of our patient or our staff. It is really because of ourselves. We are the one who stays in the clinic rather than the patient the entire day. And who is our enemy? It's not just COVID-19. These are pathogenic bacteria and virus. So, we need to understand how they can cause disease. Okay? So, there are different levels. There is what we call adaptation, injury, cellular death, neoplasia, and aging. And what does it mean? Now, initially, like any other foreign body, if it goes into your body, it tends to adapt to your system. When I lecture, I normally correlate it with real life. For example, if your boyfriend, your husband, your partner ends up seeing someone else, that someone else tends to adapt to your relationship. Now, it doesn't mean it doesn't affect your relationship. It does. So it's the same thing with this organism or foreign bodies that gets into our body. And then, the longer it stays there, now it causes injury. We are injured already. So the level of our body to protect itself from this foreign body, just like in a relationship, later on there's collateral damage. And the normal cells, some of the normal cells dies, or gets affected. And this eats up. And that's also true in any other relationship. When you allow, even if you know that your better half has someone else. And then as it progresses, of course, the foreign body becomes braver. It starts really making it as a home. So the foreign body, just like COVID-19, it started making our lungs initially its home. And it's the same thing when, your husband or your girlfriend has another person. This person becomes braver because you are not capable of fighting for it. So that's when neoplasia comes about. So, after majority of the cells dies because, our body cannot handle anymore and it's getting defeated and it's dying. And so, at the end of the day, it just lets go. And like, for example, that's also true in any relationship. Like if the wife or the husband gets older and, they're already afraid to change what they are used to. So in the end, they allow the other person to totally destroy their life. So it's the same thing with COVID-19. That is how the stages of this virus attacks our body and may result to death. COVID-19 is not our only enemy. There are bacteria that causes diseases to our body who are infectious, and these are contagious from person to person. Although we don't normally get scared of them because only a handful of them can actually cause infection in humans. Plus, most of them already susceptible to treatments and vaccine. That's why it is important that you understand that there are two categories of it, the gram-positive and the gram-negative, because this will affect on how you buy your disinfectant. Why is it that the equipment you have to buy for sterilization has to be this? Because for pathogenic bacteria, they can actually live with a, exist without a host. So when it is harmful, it can really also kill us, just like pneumonia. In addition, pathogenic bacteria are actually classified as prokaryotes. As I said, they are a single cell and they can actually live without a specific host, unlike the virus. Since there is pathogenic, there's also good bacteria, which are actually found in the mouth, gut, skin, and woman's vagina. And that is why there are probiotics, which improves our immunity system. And by the way, I had an interview with the distributor, Roche Ruiz, who discussed probiotics, and it's very interesting discussion, and you might see that vlog. You can see that vlog in our website, and I do suggest you visit it because it will give you an appreciation about probiotics. For bacterial and viral infections such as chlamydia, syphilis, HPV, and herpes, these are all transmitted via contact with infected fluids like genital secretion, semen, and blood. Now, contact with the infected skin can also lead to sexually transmitted transmission. So, majority of sexually transmitted infection, you don't actually get it from sitting on the toilet seat. So, for some of you who keeps stepping on it and not cleaning it after using, please stop doing it because you're even putting more bacteria on it than what's actually in there. So, because this sexually transmitted infection can't live outside the human body for a very long period of time. So, it easily deteriorates. For example, chlamydia. So, if your husband transmitted to you chlamydia, then it didn't come from the toilet seat. Okay? And we shouldn't also ignore pathogenic bacteria because we think, oh, they can be killed by patient taking antibiotics. Because according to CDC, 2 million people in the US are infected with antibiotic resistant bacteria, and this is called MRSA, or what we know as methicillin resistant Staphylococcus aureus. Okay, and this one actually can be transmitted, like for example, if your gloves that you use actually is permeable and not the right gloves to protect you from these kinds of bacteria. Even if pathogenic bacteria is not that scary, and that's the reason why most of the dentists don't normally practice infection control before, even the very basic. They are dangerous if ever they get into your body. Now, viruses are generally parasitic and they require living cells or tissue to grow. So, they need to have a host in order to live, unlike bacteria. So, viruses specifically, most of the time, attack the cells of the liver, respiratory system, or blood. They have genetic information, either RNA or DNA. So, with the case of COVID-19, it is an RNA virus. The virus has the tendency to infect the host cell to access its machinery and then replicates its DNA and hijack its machinery in order to reproduce. So it is like a mistress or somebody who is trying to steal your man or your girl. They have the audacity to get into the relationship, and then it starts messing up your relationship and hijack your relationship. So that is basically a virus. We need to understand the importance of knowing this enemy so that we can understand later on part 2 why exactly do you need this kind of disinfectant or this kind of equipment as something you need for sterilization. Infection control is basically understanding what you are trying to kill. It's not understanding what you need to buy now. So that is the reason why I am discussing these things to you, so that later on, when you get to choose what you want to invest on or start doing infection control, if you have not been doing that before COVID-19, you will decide not based on panic or influence from other people, but because of understanding the scientific makeup of the enemies you're trying to kill. I will be discussing to you the list of diseases that you can acquire in a medical and dental environment. Why? This is what's nice about COVID-19. If it has something good about it, it made us appreciate that pathogenic bacteria and viruses exist. Because before, materials for infection control or how we use our PPE or the availability of quality PPEs in our dental clinic is the least of our concern when it comes to spending our budget for the clinic. But because of this, it changed the way we think on how we clean, disinfect, sterilize our dental clinics. Because now we are aware that we are vulnerable to them. For example, in our toilet, if you have a toilet in your dental clinic, if you place a soap that is more water than soap, then, for example, this shigellosis, it can be transferred from the hands, feces, to your mouth. As you can see, it stays 3 hours in the fingers. So, because you're trying to save money to buy soap and you are mixing it with water, the tendency now, especially before this COVID-19, I think only 2% of people knows how to really wash their hands. So, in the end, it gets transferred. And like, for example, you get diarrhea for it. And since we're so used to diarrhea, we think it's just, we ate bad food. So we are not aware on how important it is to wash hands every time you go to the toilet. So actually, when I used to lecture before Exposed version 1, after my lecture, when I go with the dentist and we are getting into the toilet at the same time and washing hands, you will notice they will be very, very much aware now on how to wash their hands. But probably after 2 or 3 days, they forget again how to properly wash their hands because it isn't a habit before. But because of COVID-19, we are forced now to really wash our hands properly and as often as we can. Another disease that stays and quite a disease that we should be concerned about is tuberculosis. Although in developed countries, this has been eradicated. But as you can see, how long this bacteria stays in objects or surfaces. Okay? So, we need to be aware of this because it can be transferred on us if we don't properly clean, disinfect, and sterilize the surfaces or our instruments, and it can be transferred from one patient to another patient or from a patient to you, especially to you. Another thing that we should be concerned about is the flu virus and the antivirus. The flu virus is, we often get this, okay? And although it doesn't live for a longer period of time in non-porous surfaces, okay, it is airborne and again can be transferred to direct contact. So the flu virus comes and go and it became a part of our lives, but we don't care so much about it because it has vaccine and it has treatment. Now, I don't know if you've been listening recently, but in the news. But again, in China, there is a discovery of this hantavirus pulmonary syndrome, which actually comes from mice. Okay? This virus is shed in the droppings, urine, and saliva of rodents. Okay? So, the only good thing about this is that it doesn't get easily transmitted human to human. But just recently, there are already cases that is seen in China for this hantavirus. And this is airborne. Now, actually, these are the diseases that we should be concerned about because this can be easily transmitted human to human, the hepatitis. However, again, before COVID-19, we don't really care so much about contracting hepatitis because there's already a vaccine that exists to deal with this disease. And normally, it is sexually transmitted. But we have to be concerned on hepatitis A. Another virus, which is HIV. HIV, the only good thing about HIV is that when it goes to the surfaces, it doesn't really stays that long or can live that long. Just as I mentioned earlier, sexually transmitted infection or viruses or bacteria that causes these kinds of disease doesn't last longer outside or in a surface. Now, however, we also have to be very concerned on HIV virus because the number one profession wherein HIV can be contracted is the profession of practicing dentistry, especially if you are doing oral surgery or anything that has got to do with blood-borne procedures. If again you're trying to be updated about the situation of HIV, it is increasing in numbers. So, and the problem with HIV, again, you don't know if that person has HIV. So, this is something not only, COVID-19 we are focusing on, but this HIV has been in existence for quite some time. And again, when it comes to HIV, there is what they called a zero conversion period. This period is a window period, which means that during this time, you could have a negative HIV test even though you have been already infected. And it is also important to note that during this time, you could also spread the virus to others even though you have tested negative. On the next part, which is measles, okay, it is also airborne and it can live for several hours on the surface and can be transmitted as well through direct contact. But as usual, we are not much concerned about measles because there's already a treatment for it, unlike COVID-19. So, as I've mentioned, MRSA is another thing that we should be concerned about, especially when we buy our gloves. Now, majority of us don't really care what kind of gloves we use as long as we are not allergic to it, and especially if the price is right. But this is something you have to be concerned about because we keep on touching our patient's mouth with our gloves. So if you're not using the right kind of quality of gloves, then you are also vulnerable to MRSA besides being vulnerable to COVID-19. Now, again, this pertussis or whooping cough, as you can see, it has a 2 weeks lifespan and can be transmitted airborne and direct contact. Rabies and STD, again, I have already mentioned it. Rabies are actually transferred from animal to human. But this is not much of our concern in terms of practicing dentistry when it comes to rabies. But there's a certain concern if you get bitten by a child, I guess. And then the STD, since this is sexually transmitted disease, this is only dangerous if it goes like the blood goes into your mucosa. So that's why PPEs are also very important if you are handling patient with STD. Now, as you can see, these viruses and bacteria has dawned on us, and like this, for example, the Ebola virus became concerned because their mortality rate or killing people is very high. Now, what is good about viruses that has a high mortality or can cause high mortality rate, it is not easily transmitted. So it has a low contagious factor. So it is like a balancing act. If it's highly contagious, the mortality rate is low. if it has low in transmission or to transmit infection to another human, then the mortality rate is higher. So it doesn't happen when a virus is highly contagious and also has a higher chances to kill you. So not yet anyway, because we don't know. Maybe COVID-19 will later mutate to something even more dangerous than it is already. And then, of course, we have the West Nile virus. Again, this is can be transmitted through blood, okay? And the Zika fever also, I think 2 or 3 years ago, some countries got affected with it. And it is again transferred through insect like dengue, but because it is not highly contagious, so it didn't become a pandemic or a certain concern for everyone. Now, if you again been updated with the news, just last November 2019, polio virus became a concern. That's why when you have to travel in countries that as an epidemic of polio virus, like for example Myanmar, you need to have a vaccine prior to going to that country. Now, although it is highly contagious as well, and as you can see, again, it is fecal oral route for transmission. So, if you don't clean the bathroom, if you don't provide the soap properly, and again, if you don't wash your hands, then this can happen. Now, however, poliovirus didn't become very popular when it was happening last November. I mean, it wasn't a big concern for a lot of people, countries, because again, there is a vaccine that exists to stop it from wreaking havoc in our lives. So let's play a game and see if you are actually awake when you listen to webinars, or even awake for the past 1 hour already. Sorry about that. I'm extending because I wanted to give as much as information I can give to everyone so that you are well equipped once you go back to your practice. So let's fact check. How long do you think coronavirus has been in existence? Because there's a lot of news before that COVID-19 actually existed for a long time, and then they're just hiding it. Is it true or false? Now, the answer is true. That is, to be clear, for coronavirus family. Okay? Not for COVID-19. However, COVID-19 is a coronavirus. It's a mutation of a lot of its relatives. Okay? As in, it is zoonotic. So, it is first discovered in 1930s in animals only. And then, there is a transmission now from animals to human around 1960s. And in 1965, the coronavirus that causes common colds is finally discovered. So, this is the mutation virus strain that is seen in respiratory tract. Then it mutated to 22.9E and human coronavirus OC43. See, there are a lot of them. It's just that COVID-19 became a better coronavirus like Terminator 3 or Terminator 2. Okay? Before we go again to certain facts about COVID, let me ask you some fact check. Okay? COVID-19 is first discovered in Wuhan, Hubei province in China in December 2019 and should be called Chinese virus. True or false? Okay. Now, you have to clap your hands if you got this answer correct because this is a very tricky question. Okay? Now, its origin from Wuhan is true and it is indeed became known in December 2019. However, the second half of the sentence, which is it should be called Chinese virus, is false. Why? Because calling it Chinese virus, like the politician in the United States, just create discrimination against the Chinese community, which it isn't their fault. Actually, it should be called CCP virus or Chinese Communist Party virus. Why? Because it is really the fault of the government of China why this became a pandemic, because they didn't really reveal the entire truth about this virus. And it is also known as 2019 novel coronavirus. The virus is also called SARS-CoV-2 and a beta coronavirus, just like MERS and SARS. So the outbreak of this COVID-19 started in Wuhan, China, and it is actually first came about in the news when doctors noticed a seemingly increase of respiratory infected patient similar to SARS-CoV. And one of those doctors who is an ophthalmologist of Wuhan Central Hospital, Dr. Li Wenliang, who died also of COVID-19 on February 7. So, China informed WHO about COVID-19 on December 31, 2019. And there are two, it's still unknown which is really true. There are two theses of where this COVID-19 really started. One is, the most common accepted as a fact that it came from a bat and it started at a wholesale seafood market in Wuhan, China. But there's another thesis that it is actually developed in a lab in Wuhan because according to news that was given by NTD, that there are two scientists since SARS-CoV who have been studying bats, and they even went to Australia, okay, to study the human-to-human transmission. And in actuality, an Argentinian lawyer filed a lawsuit in April 16 against China for this virus. So when this COVID-19 started to affect mainland China, you can see that the transmission rose so fast. that it became an outbreak. So an outbreak is considered as a category when a disease infects a lot of people in one area in a short period of time. And then suddenly, it was spread worldwide and became an epidemic. When you say epidemic, is that the occurrence in a community or region of cases of illness is spread outside the area where it started. So there is a sudden number of cases of diseases above what is normally expected. So the nCoV-19 seems to have a high transmission human to human, or can become a community transmission. So it resulted to a high infection rate. Now, unlike the rest of its family, there are only 2 coronavirus that became actual pandemic. And this is the influenza global pandemic in 1918, and now the coronavirus. Now, the SARS only became an epidemic in 2001 and 2003, while the MERS is 2012 and 2015, and it is also just an epidemic. As I've mentioned before, there's a general trade-off when it comes to viruses. Now, when there is a high infection rate, the chances of killing a lot of people because of it is lower. Now, when it comes to SARS and MERS, it has a low infection rate, but the mortality rate that it can kill people is very high. Now, the reason why MERS-CoV virus is not as, it doesn't have a high infection rate, because the virus itself attaches to the lower respiratory tract, more specifically DPP4 receptor of the respiratory system. So it is located in the deeper parts of the lungs. So that's why this requires a big volume of MERS virus in order for it to reach this DPP4 receptor found in the deeper parts of the lungs. But once you get infected of it, there is a 35% chance that you will die from it. And MERS became really concerned, or it became a big epidemic, specifically in the Middle East. So when it comes, like for example, for the Ebola virus also, the fatality rate is 70 to 90%. But again, it has a very low infectious rate. That's why the other viruses, although it affected a lot of people and countries, it is not like the coronavirus, because the infectious rate of the coronavirus is very high. However, the good thing about it, because of the trade-off, it has only 2 to 4% fatality rate. So from the time COVID-19 was seen in China, studies shows that there's really a high human-to-human transmission in terms of percentage, and the fatality death is quite low. But you have to ask, how come there's already more than 1 million who died from COVID-19? Well, they died indirectly from COVID-19 because of the high transmission or infection rate. The volume of patient that goes to the hospital is so much, to the point that, as we all know, doctors and nurses cannot handle anymore. including equipments that are life-saving for patients who got worse symptoms than the others. Like for example, as again we all know, people who are over the age of 60 and above, and those with compromised conditions. So, the scary part about COVID 19 is that symptomatic patients can become contagious 2 days prior to the incubation period, which is around 8 days. And asymptomatic patient is also contagious. And as you can see, symptoms will start to appear on the seventh day. And then if it gets worse, then on the ninth day, the patient has to go to the hospital, and potentially they might end up in the ICU. And if the equipment to save this patient from dying is lacking, then of course it will lead to death. And this is where flattening the curve comes in. We are trying to lower down the volume of people contracting COVID 19 because our health system cannot handle it. Just like what we've seen in China, Italy, and now in the United States. So, as you can see, the total number of, as of the moment, the total number of people who got COVID 19 globally is already more than 3 million. So that's how scary it is. Another thing is that we really don't know how long this virus will stay in the body of an infected patient. It is unknown. Some study or some cases shows that asymptomatic patients still has the virus between 2 to 3 weeks. There's a stool test that was taken from an infected body, and this virus stays up to 22 days to 3 weeks or even 26 days. And the longest patient wherein COVID-19 can be seen, which is the case in South Korea, is 52 days. Now, since COVID-19 is part of the coronavirus family, they have this kind of characteristics. Similar, like for example, for MERS, there is a patient, although this patient has cancer and has a low immunity system, but the MERS virus stayed in that patient's body for 5 months. So that's the scary part about this virus. Now, as you can see, the infection rate is very high, and that is why globally there's more than 3 million already got infected by COVID-19. The good thing is, as I've said, the fatality rate is low. That's why there's more than 1 million who already recovered. Now, based on statistics, there are 20% of COVID patients that are asymptomatic, 11.6% death rate for above 80 years old, 6.3% death rate for for people in their 70s, 1.5 death rate in their 60s, 0.4% death rate in their 50s, and 0.1% teenagers up to 40 years old. So this means that for those teenagers or young ones who are very stubborn in following this social distancing rule because they believe that they don't need it, that they will not die from it, what they don't realize is that they can be a carrier and ends up transmitting that virus to their loved ones, like their parents or their grandparents. So this is one of the ways why we will be defeated by this virus, as I mentioned earlier, which is selfish, being selfish. So these people who don't really care because they think that they will not die from this COVID-19, they don't think of the other people that they might transmit this disease. So, as I've said, even before the incubation period, you can already be contagious. So, what is the mechanism of action of this COVID-19? So, we basically know that the main symptoms for those who got affected by COVID-19 virus is fever, coughing, difficulty in breathing. However, there's also a result which is a little bit rare, that they cannot smell or taste anything, and this can last 5 to 10 days. And up to 30% of those with COVID-19 experience these symptoms. So if you have a patient that complains that they cannot seem to smell anything or taste anything, then that's one symptom that you have to be careful, because that patient might have COVID-19. So basically, what is important in our profession is how this virus gets really transmitted from one person to the other, or results to community spread. Okay, so again, I think majority of the people who are here in this webinar has attended more than one webinar about coronavirus. So we basically know that this COVID-19 can be transmitted through direct contact, which is what? Shake hands or shaking hands. So much better to bow. That's why in Japan and Korea, that's not a problem. But I guess it will be a problem in the love life, because you cannot have a direct contact if your partner has COVID-19. Another thing is the indirect contact now, or transference. Now, this is basically, that's why we advise everybody to wash their hands and not to keep on touching their face, because the entry of this virus is in the eyes, nose, and in the mouth through its mucous membrane. So, there is a study that shows that, those in the medical profession, or even including us, we tend to touch our face 19 times in 2 hours. And for average people, around 23 times in 1 hour. So that's why washing our hands, not just washing, but washing it properly, and doing it at the right amount of time is very critical now. So as I mentioned, if you place 90% water and 10% soap in your liquid soap in the toilet, and you have your patient use that toilet, and even if they wash their hand, there's not enough surfactants in the soap, can kill this COVID-19. So you think you are saving money, but you ended up losing your life. So another mode of transmission, which is very much of a concern to all of us, and I believe this is the reason why every one of you are here and figure out what is the best way to protect us once we go back to our practice. And that is precisely why I encourage you to do and continue the part 2. Well, hopefully I have not put you yet into sleep. Okay, so there are ways in which this becomes transmitted via air. Now, in the transference, majority of this is in the form of the droplets. So they get transferred through droplet. And a droplet is considered a droplet if the size is around 5 microns and above. Okay?
And because the size of a droplet is quite big, depending on the force of expulsion and whether you are outside or inside the room, like for example you are in an aircon space, the droplet can be propelled up to 6 to 12 feet. Okay, now for the medium sized droplet are more likely to enter the nasopharynx. Like for example, if someone ends up coughing on your face, and then if it's a medium-sized droplet and you are a bit close to that person, then more or less you're gonna have uh, COVID-19. Now, the most difficult part to control is aerosol, because aerosol is less than 5 microns. And because it's very small and very light, it is not affected by gravity. So it travels up to 2 meters or 6.5 feet. So this is very important to us as dentists, because majority of our procedure involves aerosol or droplets. Now, in the surface, we have to contend ourselves with fomites. These are transmission through the surface. And study shows that it depends on the kind of the surface, temperature, and humidity. COVID-19 can stay into the surface several hours or up to 4 days. Okay? So, for example, in a 5 to 10 degrees Celsius or 41 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit with 30% humidity, this virus can survive for a long time. That's why there is a thesis that this virus can die during summer or when it is hot. Now, but there's no evidence yet that this is true. Now, also, one thing we have to think about is that since this virus it stays longer on a surface, like for example, paper, COVID-19 can last for one whole day in the paper. And we have a lot of that in our clinic. Wood, it can take up to 5 to 7 days. So imagine that. So I can understand the concerns of everyone of going back to the practice, because majority of our surfaces is very conducive for COVID-19 to use it as their own home and stay there until they find a host for them to survive. Now, so let's go to what this COVID is really made of, or its parts. Now, again, this is necessary that we understand how this COVID affects our body so that we will be guided and we can also help our patient who don't really understand this virus. They thought this is just a common cold. Okay, so this COVID-19 has spikes. That's why, it's called coronavirus. It looks very nice on the photo as if it's a candy or, but it is very deadly once it goes into your lungs. Now, again, this spike glycoprotein tends to attach itself into the ACE2 receptor that is found in our alveoli or parts of our body, like for example, the tongue, the nose, the back of our throat, so this gets attracted, and it also has a certain envelope that this envelope kind of protects it, and this is the one destroyed if we wash our hands properly through the surfactants found in soap. So what it does once it enters in your body, like for example in your nose or in your mouth, okay, it goes to the windpipe or the trachea. And then it travels into your main stem, right and left bronchi. And then as we know, the lungs is like, gets separated with a lot of branches like trees. Now, these smaller parts, there are smaller parts of these branches in the lungs which are called alveolus. Now, these alveolus have two types of structure, the type 1 and the type 2. Now, the type 2 is the one with ACE2 receptors. And so the spikes of this COVID-19 will now be caught in the ACE2 receptor and will now travel and enjoy itself while it replicates. Now, the moment it replicates, of course, we have antibodies like macrophages, a white blood cell. Well, as we know, macro means big and phage means eating. And we also have surfactants in the lungs, fibroblasts. All of these things will try to protect the body. Unfortunately, there is what once it replicates and become powerful. Remember my slides earlier about how it causes disease. So once the antibodies cannot handle this COVID-19, it will now create a cytokine storm or cytokine storm. So what is that cytokine storm? Now, when this happens, these are the reason why some patients ends up in the hospital or an ICU. Because, like for example, you think, oh, a young person, good immunity system. But if the body overreacts to the situation, this can also result to a cytokine storm. And this is an immunological phenomenon that leads to severe pneumonia and death. Because what it does, it is like, our antibodies are trying to protect our body from this onslaught of COVID-19 that replicated in volume. So, our antibody now is like shooting bullets to kill them. Unfortunately, by shooting bullets, they don't know because they don't recognize this foreign body. They ended up hitting even the cells that is not COVID-19. And that is the problem when this phenomenon occurs, because the normal cells become the collateral damage, and this can result to a really bad situation. So whatever age a person may be, will be vulnerable in this kind of phenomenon. Although the risk for older patient and for older people and for those who have compromising diseases or existing disease that even lowers down, the virus, our antibodies are already busy fighting the current war that they have. For example, if the patient is diabetic, our immunity system are already fighting that war. And then you add up COVID-19. So what do you expect? Then, of course, we will end up dying if that occurs.
Okay. We're done for the part 1. I'm sorry if I extended my time. This is a bad habit of mine, especially when I get to discuss something I am passionate about. And infection control has been a passionate topic of mine even before COVID-19. Besides aesthetics. So anyway, this is your time to stretch out, go to the toilet, have a bite, and hopefully you can stay logged in, or if you log out, do log in immediately before we start. Thank you so much for staying and for attending the very first webinar of DMD Center. I hope to get to see you in part 2, wherein we will be discussing what you are all interested about, of what protective gear, equipments, and solutions that you need to have once we go back to our practice. Okay, thanks again.